So now I want to discuss and explain to Muslims how to take on and understand the controversial subject of age of consent. This is again something that Muslims are constantly bombarded with and often don't have good arguments to counter. First, understand the principles of Sharia. Now, Sharia has an underlying baseline principle of preventing harm. So that could be prevention of harm of property, prevention of harm of society, and in our discussion, prevention of harm of the individual. Everything stems from that. It's trying to prevent something bad happening to X. Yeah. And that's not abnormal. That's in fact how laws are made across the world. For example, in the West, they don't just make laws for fun, or sometimes they do, but generally they're there to prevent some sort of harm. And you can imagine that. Yeah. So don't carry certain weapons, don't, speed, etc. They're there to design to limit harm. And that's a very rational way of making a law. So in Islam, although you can get married at a very early age of consent is limited, at least from previous scholars, from a very rational perspective, saying it just can't harm the girl. There can be no psychological harm, there can be no societal harm, and there can be no harm to her. And that's the key thing. So it's not about a specific age after, and there is a kind of puberty kind of baseline, yeah, but it's any harm that's caused to the individual even after that, if that can be understood or studied or explained by even the individual. So let's just take a hypothetical thought experiment. Let's say that Harvard, for example, or Oxford University or Cambridge or whoever, any top university comes out with a study that's conclusive that says that there is harm to children or harm to any young person under the age of 15. Let's just make it even more easier. Let's say there's a physical harm at 12 and a psychological harm that's studied, that's across the board, that's conclusive at 15. Sharia would change its position to say, well, if that's the data that suggests harm, then it has to be after that age. So it's all to do with harm. Now, the Western world also has this. It's about harm. And that's how they set their minimum criteria. But I'm going to explain the difference. So it's not about Western morality saying, well, I just feel it's 18. I'm just going to say it's 18. 18 or 16 or whatever has come about because they're trying to prevent harm. But their harm, which is perfectly justified, is different due to the different societies. And allow me to explain. So, for example, when they got rid of the institution of marriage, now girls didn't have to have relations in a secure environment with one person for the rest of their life that would ensure their safety, security, and provision. So in effect, what the Western world did was it said that you don't need to have that. You can do it just for fun. It's for your pleasure. And by doing that, that opened up a floodgate, because what then could happen is that if people who were far more mature, they could then have access to your daughter, let's say, they could clearly manipulate her. Whereas prior, they didn't have access unless they were suitors for marriage. Now that was gone. So now harm changed for the Western world, not for the Islamic world. So now what they did was perfectly rational. They said, oh my God, all these predators are out because we've now allowed our daughters to make a decision on who they want to enjoy themselves with. We need to change the law. So up it crept. Now, adding to that, there was another layer of fail-safe that they got rid of. They got rid of the fact that previously, when you came to as a suitor for marriage for your daughter, the family would do a check. They do a background check. Who the hell are you? Who's your family? Who's your dad? Who's your mum? What do the neighbours say about you? Who do you hang out with? What's your qualifications? All of these checks, this kind of 100-point check to see if you kind of pass your MOT, was done at the door before you even had any access at all, even had a chance to have any interaction with this girl, let alone actually marrying and having to provide for her for the rest of your life. So there's these massive fail safes in Western liberal society, and they got rid of them. Now all of a sudden their daughter could go out and go to a club, a bar, or whatever, find her own guy with no background check. Now imagine the panic which is perfectly rational when you remove these fail-safes that society has created to protect your daughters, and said, no, go out there and enjoy yourself. It's all a bit of fun. And all of a sudden, what actually happened naturally was society, parents went, oh my God, what's going to happen out there? So what they then did is they pressured and pressured to ensure that these people weren't going to manipulate young girls who were clearly going to be immature and not going to be able to make that decision of themselves, because there's no other fail-safe. You're going to go to a club and that's it. So that's why laws crept up in the West. But also, last and not least, the fact that, modern society changed, and therefore people lived safer lives and didn't have to get tied down at a certain age, because there wasn't going to be a lion eating them or something like that. Health service, security service, people had better money, better housing, so they naturally grafted to marrying later. Yeah, and so if you're married later, then there was a period that you may want to have relations from the Western perspective. Yeah, so again, all this worry from the Western mind was all to do with all their fail-safes had been knocked out that they previously accepted, but the Muslims kept hold of their fail-safes. They didn't want anyone interacting with their daughters who weren't going to marry them. Yeah, there wasn't 20 people queuing up to meet their daughter just for pleasure. There was 0 people queuing up to meet their daughter. So the panic around that consent wasn't there because it just didn't exist. Make sense? So they had to have a perfectly rational higher legal age limit to prevent harm, exactly like Islam and Sharia said. That's what the baseline is, prevention of harm. But their harm was due to their own fail-safes failing or being removed. Our fail-safes didn't be removed, so we didn't have that worry or that harm. What they then twisted it to do is they changed their harm to a moral cause. They said, we like art because we're better than you, which was typical supremacy. It wasn't based on harm anymore. They twisted their new age that they discovered due to their failures within society and made it it is the best because we say so, and I just accept this as a moral thing. And they twist their arguments between harm and morality. Harm and it's just better because we say it's better. And you can never allow that. What you've always got to do is pin them and say, why? And they will always come back to harm. And if they come back to harm, because they can't just claim that they're better than you, right? If they come back to harm, you can say, great, I agree with you. Where's your evidence on harm? That's the bottom line. Muslims are not there to try to harm anyone. In fact, Sharia's base principle is to stop harm. So in effect, they can evidence harm to a younger person, even psychological harm, then that would creep the bar of age of consent up. Now, in reality, in the Muslim world, generally people are not doing that at a young age in any event because it's not allowed. And since the age of marriage has gone up in the Muslim world due to wealth, yeah, as it has across the globe, people get marrying later, then so is the age of consent. So in effect, we don't really have that problem anyway. Yeah, it is in small pockets, but again, it's based on harm only because they're poverty stricken, so they might get married at a younger age. It's not really a problem for us. It's a problem for them. Yeah, and because we can't explain it properly, we fall down on that. All right, so thanks. I hope that made myself clear. Sorry I took so long.